Hello, listeners, and welcome to Fighting Failure. This is the next episode of our conservation section, all about forestry. I'm your host, Sandhya.
I'm your co-host, Oscar Archibald. Unfortunately, Hisho couldn't be here. He's in America, he's travelling, he's a very busy lad.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's continue.
Let's start with the problems. The main problem with forestry, everyone should have heard of it, hopefully, deforestation. Deforestation is stemming from so many small issues that our Earth's forests are declining at an alarming rate.
There are some really just incredible statistics about how many football fields are cut out down every second or something in the Amazon rainforest.
I have a link at the bottom of the show notes that have a bunch of facts about trees.
So if you just guys go down to the show notes, description, whatever, and just click the link and you can just be amazed at how many trees we're managing to cut down. So the first small issue that's causing deforestation is paper reduction. Think about how many different papers, newspapers, so, the get your news, all of that. I think newspapers are a lot less common, but there's stuff like magazines, so I think we're personally guilty of getting The Economist, a New Scientist in print, and they do come from sustainable forests and recyclable packaging, all that sort of stuff, but that's sort of an example of a thing that you can also get the digital version, although the New Scientist app is absolutely trash. But anyway, paperback books, hardback books, I tend to read on the Kindle. I get some of my books hardback, but not too many, and so you don't want to sort of be piling up. It's a good idea if you like having paper books, is to go to your library and borrow them, and it's perfectly fine to get a couple of books if you're sentimental about them. But yeah, I think a time when books maybe aren't so great is if you in class exercise books, because you just go through loads and loads of those. I know our school does get sustainable managed forest as well.
I'm very guilty of notebooks. I have a lot of notebooks.
But then again, you probably read 5 times as many books as you've got in print on your Kindle, don't you? That's what I think.
That's true, yeah.
So definitely look into stuff like Kindles, digital exercise books, libraries. Those are great ways. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're not in the solution section yet.
Yeah.
Another thing is paper packaging. And the thing with paper packaging is that people see it as an alternative to plastic packaging. So yeah, it's a bit complicated there. And then the last thing is other stuff like tissues. But what I do instead of tissues is, this is going to sound really gross, but when I'm in a shower, I just blow my nose into my hand and then wipe it off with soap and water, and that saves tissues as well. But I'm not going to tell you all about my showering routine. Let's move on.
Agribusiness, if he's still here, he would probably be very interested in this one, which is burning and clearing land for livestock and crops. It is actually the number one driver of deforestation. And essentially these biodiverse areas of forestry and land become monocultures for farms and crops.
So a monoculture is basically, before you have a forest with different crops, like we've talked about, the undergrowth, the trees, the small trees like the ferns, the canopy, the big trees, you've got lots of different species, and they're in an ecosystem and they help each other out. Monoculture, on the other hand, is if you imagine just rows and rows of soya or oat or barley or wheat or corn or any other sort of monocultures. We just have one species just lining the fields. And when we were on our Duke of Edinburgh expedition hike thing, we were passing through the English countryside, and we just came across these rows of crops, and just one crop, one height, no variation, and the soil was really bad as well. So you could see, this is probably something that would have been good for the agriculture section, and we have talked about it in the agriculture section. But if you like, the natural biome of the English countryside is a forest. Originally, all of the English countryside was entirely forests. So all those forests have been cut down to make way for these monocultures. And you might think of the English countryside as quite idyllic, but it has been massively deforested.
Yeah, definitely. So that's agribusiness. And then there's also illegal logging. So there's legal logging, which is where people have permission to go and chop down these trees, and they're often controlled. Legal logging is often controlled. So they have permission to cut down a certain number of trees or a certain area of trees. But illegal logging has they don't pay attention to the rules, essentially. And research actually suggests that it makes up over 10% of the global timber trade, which is over $150 billion per year from illegal activities. It's a huge industry, and it's threatening forests all over the world.
And I guess the thing about illegal logging is it's also quite location dependent. So maybe in somewhere like the UK, the forests may be more responsibly managed, or maybe they just don't have as much forestry industry in terms of cutting down trees for timber or paper or those other wood-based products. So I think it's a bigger problem in places where the forests are perhaps more special. So in places like the Amazon rainforest, that is being massively deforested, and the Brazilian government, A, doesn't care, but B, just can't control it. They just don't have the resources or the money to be able to control that industry. And it's very profitable because it's more expensive to be sustainable, because you have to make sure you're planting enough trees, and you have to make sure you're paying your taxes, and so that's the problem, is that if you can't keep control of it, then it just is absolutely decimating forests, especially in Africa and Latin America and Asia and places like that.
Yeah. Moving on to mining, which is similar to the agribusiness, because they're clearing forests to make way for industrial, I guess, farming. So when they're clearing these forests, they can clear it for crops and animals, or they can clear it for mining. And people will clear the huge areas of forest just to try and find coal and oil and metals like gold and copper and aluminium. And when they're mining for these resources,
you said aluminium.
Aluminium.
Hooray!
Is that
you didn't say aluminum. Americans always say aluminum, and it annoys me so much.
You British
I say aluminium.
Are rubbing off on me.
I'm so glad you said aluminium the proper way.
I think it's aluminum foil, but it's aluminium when you're talking about the mineral.
I just say tin foil.
Tin foil.
Yeah, tin foil.
Okay. But essentially, when you're mining for these resources, often mining companies don't control their
impact on the environment.
Their impact on the environment, yeah. And so it's contaminating the forest ecosystems around the area where they're mining, the cleared area where they're mining. And you were talking about the Amazon earlier, and also it's because it's a big problem there, where there's illegal mining and they're contaminating key river systems, and like those river systems are gonna like run through the entire Amazon. And
yeah, the Amazon River, right?
I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the ocean conservation episode, especially with chemicals. And
because obviously rivers fall into the sea. So yeah, the thing about mining is that people might not think about mining, but it actually does make up a small percentage. I remember when we were doing this set of statistics with Hisho about sort of causes of deforestation, back when we were doing that, and drivers of deforestation, and one of those was mining. It was a small percentage, but it was a significant percentage. So the thing about mining is not only do you have to see deforested areas to sort of extract these minerals and fuels and diamonds and those sort of things, right? Because you have to get further and further away to try and find new resources to fuel the global demand. But anyway, the problem is that mining, you might not realize this, but it requires a huge amount of water. There's just so much water, it's kind of insane. But obviously this water, once it's been sort of used, has to have somewhere to go. But once they just throw it away and it drains into the Amazon River or other rivers which are tributaries of the Amazon.
And once it's been used, it's contaminated.
Exactly, it's contaminated. So when you use huge volumes of water and you don't dispose of it properly or filter it properly, you're actually releasing a huge amount of contaminants into the environment, which is one of possibly a bigger impact that mining has than deforestation. It's not like in Minecraft where you can just dig a one block wide hole and then go underneath. It's not like that. I'm sorry, people.
Yeah.
So roads are a problem, like we talked about in wildlife conservation, because they split up habitats, they fragment these habitats, so it's called habitat fragmentation. They separate different populations, which sort of has problems for the gene pool, which means they can't have as strong genetics, and they can't communicate with other members of the species. That's obviously a problem. But another problem is that it just makes it easier for illegal loggers to get to the forest. So if you have a road going through the middle of the Amazon, suddenly it is so much easier for these illegal loggers to get there, deforest, and then take the timber with them. So roads are a problem on many levels in places where there's both for wildlife and because it just makes it easier to get there to do bad things.
Yeah, there's supposed to be a bullet point here, and there isn't for some reason. But hydroelectric dams is our next point. People focus on how helpful hydroelectric dams can be, but it often causes flooding upstream, and those upstream forests are kind of destroyed by these floods. You get soil and habitat degradation, and whole ecosystems are displaced by these floods.
As well as forest communities. So yeah, the thing is, when you're in primary school and you're learning about renewable sources of energy, you probably your big five would be wind, solar, hydro, maybe those are your big three, and then you'd also maybe learn about geothermal and tidal. Right, but the thing is that the only two ones of those that are really viable are wind and solar. They can be deployed worldwide on a big scale. Solar, yes, maybe not suitable everywhere, but it'll get some amount of energy anyway. But wind and solar are cheap and easy to deploy, and they don't have much of an impact on the environment. Hydroelectric is a problem because not only have we mostly run out of places to put hydroelectric dams, we've run out of our sort of hydroelectric capacity, but actually when you create a hydroelectric dam, I'm struggling to say this, a hydroelectric dam, you as Sandhya said, you flood a huge area. If you think about a river winding through a valley, then you put a huge dam that sort of goes all the way up the sides of the valley, that entire valley is going to be flooded, and that is going to destroy those forests. And another thing that is the displacement of forest communities, so maybe native peoples who live in the forests, maybe they're the people who might be trying to protect the forest from, say, illegal loggers. I know that's the case in the Amazon, is that native communities are fighting back against illegal logging. And so when you displace those communities, then maybe they also feel detached from the land, and that's also not helpful.
Definitely. There's also urbanization. I think we touched on it briefly before, where human expansion has gotten so out of hand. Our populations have exploded, and there's more and more humans being born, and more homes needing to be built, and people are just destroying large areas of forest to create land for the ever rising population.
Yeah, and so this is especially a problem when you have in places like Brazil. We're just going to have to keep coming back to the Amazon rainforest because it's a good example, and it's one people are familiar with. So Brazil, being a sort of a developing country, is undergoing a population explosion. I wouldn't say explosion, but the population is rising rapidly, as populations tend to in developing countries. And this means that obviously these people need places to live. And so when you're in a country like Brazil, you sort of have to start cutting down the forest in a way to be able to have places to go, places to exist, I guess, to live, to make families, whatever. Anyway, but honestly, Brazil hasn't helped the problem by building a planned capital, a brand new city, bang in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. I think I talked about this a while ago, I can't remember when, but Brasilia, which is the new capital of Brazil, they just literally cut down a huge area of forest to build it. And it's not a very good city. It's very car-centric as well. So urbanization is a big problem when people try to, cut down forests.
The last one I have here on our list is forest fires. I know, I think it's been talked about, Australia wildfires. I know, yeah, Australia and California, those are the big two that everyone has been hearing about. And those forest fires are essentially from desertification, for one, and human carelessness, because, campfires just left untended. And the heat and the lightning storms with the paired with the desertification, you get like these dry areas of forest, and when the heat rises, it's like
it's so hot that the fires just set themselves off. So, yeah, interesting point about the first one, human carelessness. In Australia, where wildfires are a huge problem, during the summer, you essentially have very tight fire restrictions, which means that you're not allowed to light a match outside, I don't think. And you'll have like a fire warnings all around the country, and then a be careful of forest fires app to tell you where there's fires. And so there'll be also total fire ban days, and those are sort of the times where you just can't have any fires outside of your house. Because it's just so dangerous. Like a single spark could set off a huge fire just because it's so hot and dry, and the wood is just, it's burning to be burnt. That's a bad joke, but anyway. And so then, yeah, like Sandhya was saying, that there's the other problem is desertification, rising heat, lightning storms, and as we all know, rising global temperatures as a result of the greenhouse gas effect means that we get more extreme weather events, such as heat waves, but also such as freak rainstorms, like we're seeing flooding, as at the time of recording, we're seeing flooding in Germany and Belgium with hundreds of people missing. And this is because you can't necessarily say any singular you can't necessarily say any singular event was a result of climate change, but you can say that as a result of climate change there are more freak weather events. And so this means that although forest fires happened before humans were around, they weren't nearly on the scale that they are now because of human carelessness and because of climate change.
Yeah. Are there any other problems that you can think of immediately? I know there's like a ton more that we could probably go into.
Well, I think another problem related to deforestation is that even when reforestation occurs, is that you just cannot achieve the level of biodiversity that you had before you cut down the forest. So forests provide it's habitat destruction as well. They provide a habitat for so many different animals, and when you cut down the forests, even if you then plant more trees, even if you get the same sort of carbon sequestration from the trees, you're going to have lost a diversity of different plant species. It's not going to be the same. So even if we planted millions of trees in the Amazon, they wouldn't be the same trees, and it wouldn't have the same level of diversity and the same different animals that we love the Amazon for. So even people might say you could just plant more trees, but deforestation is irreversible.
Yes, definitely. So actually, on that note, we're moving on to the solutions, and our first one is reforestation, which is, I have said, the obvious one, which everyone thinks about. Like when they think deforestation, they think, oh, just do reforestation. But not all the trees planted will grow, and it's hard to make up for the rapid loss of trees. And as Oscar has said, you're not gonna get the same level of biodiversity and like the same ecosystems as you had before, because you've chased off all of those animals. Those animals have lost their homes, and now you've planted them, but there's no guarantee those animals are going to come back and the ecosystems are going to flourish there again.
Exactly. With current scientific technology, as of the time of recording, extinction is irreversible. So the only times our extinction has been reversed is where we didn't realise that it wasn't extinct. So, yeah. And yeah, the thing about I've lost my train of thought now after making silly jokes. Yeah, so the thing with reforestation is that you shouldn't back away from reforestation. It is the obvious solution and is a solution. It's even stupider not to plant the trees back, but just be aware that it's the same with carbon offsetting, is that it's better not to cut down the trees in the first place. It's better not to emit the carbon in the first place. And if you do end up cutting down trees for a small amount of trees, just plant them back. Plant back more trees than you cut down, for sure.
Yeah. We also have government regulations as a solution. Just to note, most of my solutions here, I have said there are negative sides to these solutions, and not all solutions are going to be the solution. There is no, as we've said before, there is no silver bullet, and there's nothing, like, we have gone pretty far in this.
We've dug ourselves a very deep hole, and it's not necessarily going to be easy to get out of it.
Yeah. So government regulations, there's the idea of banning clear cutting of forests to curb the total depletion of forest cover. And this is a very feasible plan. Essentially, you're not allowed to cut down huge areas of forestry. You cut down like trees here and there, so you still have like the ecosystem and the tree cover, but you get the resources from it.
Yeah, so there's definitely government regulations in place across the world, and I think that this is done well in developed countries where they have the ability to police it, where they have the political will to implement these things. But in Brazil, the governing party seems to not understand, or I think Jair Bolsonaro denies climate change, denies the existence of COVID. He's a bit of a... This is not a political podcast, but I hate Jair Bolsonaro. So we aim to give solutions, not necessarily to poop on people. But I've got to say that the current political situation in Brazil is terrible for the environment and for the Amazon rainforest. And so government regulations have to be paired with effective enforcement of those regulations. And so even if Brazil changed the laws, if they didn't change the policing, we would be no better off, I don't think. And so, yeah, you've got to have effective strategies to implement regulations, but it is definitely feasible. So, yeah. Another thing to do is sort of implement sustainable forestry, where you have an incentive or some other way, or marketing or whatever that means, or subsidization, so that you have sustainably managed forests that are cut down but then replanted at the same rate, so that it's a bit like growing a crop, except on a bit of a longer term, I guess.
Yeah. I did put under government regulations, downside would be possibly more illegal activity for people who like...
Yes, more illegal activity, but that's a bit of a silly thing to say. It's like, if you suddenly illegalized owning a house, there will be more illegal activity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that society is worse off.
That's true.
So yes, there will be more illegal activity, but if clear cutting of forests was legal, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. So yes, more legal activity, but I guess that's just a point to work on for the government.
Yes.
In that case.
Good point. All right. We also have reduced the consumption of paper, which is like one of like another, of course, solution. If you have demand, then you have supply. So if you use less paper products, there's gonna be like less. If there's less of a demand for paper products and things that come from cutting down trees, you're gonna have less trees cut down because there's less of a demand.
Yeah. It's the same with oil companies. If you use less fossil fuels, then they'll either make less of fossil fuels or try and make you buy more fossil fuels. So we'll see how that turns out with paper. But anyway, it as Sandhya's written here, it needs a lot of people to make the impact, unfortunately. But like it's a tricky thing. It's like, honestly, if I stopped using paper, then probably nothing would change. But if I kept using paper, definitely nothing would change. So you've got to do it's the same with being vegetarian. It's the same with not using fossil fuels. Maybe my individual impact is negligible, but if I have to act, because if I don't act, definitely nothing will happen. We have to act together, I guess. But maybe you didn't understand what I said. But basically,
no, it made sense.
Every little bit counts, especially in a social way. So now for example, in the UK, a lot of banks are paperless. They don't mail you statements unless you specifically request them. It's all done online, and internally they don't use paper. So that when you have a huge bank, that is a real tangible impact on the amount of paper we use. And so there's lots of other ways that you can save paper as well. So, for example, don't just... Oh, well, okay. So if you're into art, I recommend getting a Wacom tablet. It's a one-time investment, and then you can just use infinite, well, up to the limit of your storage, but approximately infinite. You can do lots and lots of drawings without needing paper if you just get like a Wacom tablet. And I've got one. It's really nice. If you read books on your Kindle, if you as I said, use a paperless bank, try and switch your utility bills to be all done online rather than getting lots of mail. If you communicate with your relatives via Skype or instant messaging, if you're using toilet paper, make sure to fold it again, you know, use it like a handkerchief if you have a cold, so you can just put that in the wash as well.
All right, education. So I did say at the beginning of the video, hopefully everyone knows about deforestation and its impacts, but some people are less informed. So
that's the politically correct way to say that.
I'm trying to be very polite about this, Oscar. So give helpful reminders to people who may be negatively impacting the paper thing.
But you remember, you've got to be gentle about it, because this is actually a real problem, is especially I find with veganism, is that there's a very negative sentiment towards veganism because there are some people who promote it in such a way that puts people off it. So one example is that vegan teacher. I've literally talked to people in my class who say, oh my god, vegan, and that's because of these people on social media who are just being too harsh about it. And that causes a real problem. Whereas if you just tell people, say like, you know, a really great way to reduce your impact on the environment is just to have a couple less meat meals a week. And here's some great ways to do that while still being healthy and happy. Rather than saying, you should be vegan. You have to be vegan.
Yeah. Also, the points of the arguments these people on social media make are kind of like, oh, these poor animals, they're being raised for slaughter. And yeah, I mean, okay. But also, there are other reasons to go vegan than animal cruelty.
I mean,
although that's...
To be fair, animal cruelty is a huge problem.
Yes, it is.
You know, I certainly wouldn't want to work in an abattoir, but a huge part of the movement as well is environmental, and, you know, wasting so much water and unsustainable practices and all of that. So anyway, that's not what we're talking about. So if you see someone using too much paper, you could instead make sure you suggest it gently, because otherwise you'll do more harm than good. Good luck.
Yeah.
And I guess on the topic of education, also paper use in education is a problem. Like we talked about exercise books, I have a feeling that now is sort of the time that we should be using like iPads or laptops or something. That I know my sister's school uses a lot of laptops, but my school, they just give us paper. Yes, it's sustainably managed paper, but it's just on the whole better if we have like a computer that lasts 10 years or whatever, and we just do our work on that. And it's probably better for education as well. I mean, yes, they say it's like better if you like write it with your hand, but you can do that with Wacom tablet or with an iPad pencil and stuff. I know you have one of those, don't you, Sandhya?
Yes, I do. I have an iPad pencil thing. Okay, so then we have sustainable companies, and I just put e.g. Oscar's toilet paper because on Instagram, like a month or two ago, I think, you posted about your sustainable... Let me pull it up.
Sustainable toilet paper, yeah. It's called Who Gives a and it's an interesting brand, but I'm quite a fan of their marketing. It's quite cool. Not only is it entirely made of recycled paper, but they also donate 50% of their profits to build toilets in developing countries, which is just, that is an example of a really socially sustainable and environmentally sustainable company. So well done to them. You buy in bulk as well to reduce packaging. It just comes in a cardboard box. You get a big cardboard box with 40 pieces of toilet paper or something, and they're all wrapped in this colourful paper, or recycled paper, all of that. So it's really great. Definitely, if they ship to where you are, you should definitely look into getting that. Yeah. So
essentially, this is like the idea behind sustainable companies is either companies that source their paper sustainably from sustainable tree companies or whatever.
So when you're buying stuff like other cardboard or paper, always check for there should be a logo that says whether it's like sustainable. Often on packaging for food or books, maybe not like reading books, but like exercise books, it should say like Forestry Commission, I think.
Yeah. Also, I've found and I found something, I don't remember what the article is called, but it was talking about how you can get paper from sources that are not trees. There are tons of fiber sources. It talked about how people use cotton paper for banknotes. A lot of countries use cotton paper.
In the UK, we have plastic banknotes, and the same in Australia. I know the US uses some complex cotton blend, but cotton takes a lot of water, so...
That's true.
I mean, I think we should be mostly cash-free.
Yeah.
We should mainly be using online banking.
There are other sources of paper, but keep in mind that a lot of fiber sources, and including cotton... Oh, cotton is not... okay, whatever. But, like, they can take a lot of water, and that is also a problem.
Yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with trees. It's just about where you get the trees from. So it could be a bit silly to start saying we should use something else. So it's a bit like palm oil. Palm oil is the most efficient oil in terms of land use. You get much more oil per, say, acre or per square meter if you use palms. The problem with palm oil is where it comes from. So if you have sustainably sourced trees, it's just like sustainably sourced palm oil. It's probably better for the environment, possibly, depends on transportation as well, but it could be better for the environment than other plant-based oils just because of how much land you have to use for it. So you've got to be wary of thinking, oh, trees are entirely unsustainable, but random sources of fiber aren't. Because trees are very tall, you get a lot of tree in one space, and if you're using fiber from, say, wheat, that's just much shorter, so that might not be nearly as efficient. So that's something to keep in mind.
And speaking of palm oil, you need to reduce consumption of deforestation-prone products. So if your products are sourced sustainably, like, go ahead. But palm oil, things like palm oil and soybeans, we were talking about agribusiness earlier, and like, these are the things that people cut down large areas of trees to grow.
Yeah, the Amazon is primarily deforested to grow GMO soybeans, and then also to feed to graze cattle. I personally have a lot of soy products as a vegetarian. I replace a lot of meat stuff with soy, but I check that it always says sustainably sourced soy, rainforest-free soy, non-GMO soy, all those sort of things. And if it's organic, it's probably not from the Amazon rainforest because organic can't be GMO, and they mostly grow GMO soy. So just check the back. They should, if they're not boasting about how it's good, the soy is good for the environment, then it's probably not good for the environment, because if it is good, then they want to boast about it. That's a rule of thumb.
And with that, I mean, unless you can think of anything, what else?
I mean, yeah, if you're joining our Patreon, link in the description, where you can support us from as little as $1 a month, I will post a bonus video explaining how I reduce my usage of toilet paper. As little as $1 a month, that's only $12 a year to support us, gain access to exclusive episodes like the one I'm just planning to make.
Yeah, and also, again, we have a link with a bunch of facts about trees at the bottom.
Make sure to check those out. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
See you in the next one. Bye.